All right, welcome to another edition of the College 12-Pack. I'm your host, Patrick Collins, Senior Editor of the College Wires. With me, as always, is Tyler Natuno of LSU Tigers Wire and For the Win. And we're here. It felt like this season zoomed on by, Tyler, as we are now in Rivalry Week, Week 13. And there's still a lot to play for this week. There's still championship game scenarios that need to play out. The SEC is set. The ACC is set. Half of the Big Ten is set, but we're going to dive into a lot of this. But the ACC game is where I want to start. We have Florida State taking on Louisville in this matchup. Now, this matchup has changed a little bit as far as the dynamics of this game because, Tyler, Jordan Travis had a horrific injury against North Alabama in what was supposed to be the final tune-up game before they get ready to play the University of Florida in their annual rivalry game, and the matchup against Louisville in the ACC championship. Now, what makes this interesting now is you have a team who lost their starting quarterback, and as some people, Dan Woken of USA Today has mentioned, among others, is the chance that the CFP committee can look at this and say, well, because you don't have Jordan Travis, you might not be one of the four best teams, even though you may finish 13-0 with an ACC championship. And I think this conversation is beginning because this is the first time that we could logically see a 4-team playoff with the four teams combining for 0 losses. What do you make of that situation? And do you think it would be a mistake to leave Florida State out because they lost their starting quarterback if there were 4 other teams that were undefeated, like a Washington, Georgia, Ohio State, or Michigan? Where do you sit on that?
Yeah, I mean, so the Jordan Travis injury was certainly the biggest development of the weekend from a CFP perspective, and just really horrible. I mean, a gruesome injury for him. It sucks to end his career on that note. You know, a guy that been there a while. You know, been there for multiple coaching staffs. You know, just such a program guy. It really sucks to see it end that way. And it really sucks for Florida State too, in the midst of what could be a special run here. You know, losing him hurts a lot. You know, obviously they've got these last 2 games. You know, we'll see what happens against, you know, a Florida team with a backup quarterback of its own. But, you know, they won't have him for the Louisville game. So, yeah, I mean, you know, like you said, the CFP they explicitly are allowed to take that kind of thing into account. You know, they can consider, you know, the strength of the team, who's out. You know, those kind of things are factors that they are allowed to consider. With that being said, though, like, I mean, if FSU wins these next 2 games without Jordan Travis, with Tate Rodemaker at quarterback, like, you know, beating Florida, that's one thing, but you know, it is on the road. And then, but I mean, if you get the Louisville win, I mean, would be the best win on their resume. That's assuming Louisville takes care of business against Kentucky this weekend. That's a top 10 win. So I think it'd be really hard to justify not putting FSU in if they're 13-0 and win the ACC. I mean, if you're debating between, you know, FSU and a 1-loss team, if they're undefeated, I don't see how you can take the injury into account to that regard. Now, if they were to lose one of these last 2 games and all of a sudden we end up in a situation where you're comparing, you know, a 1-loss Florida State team to a 1-loss Texas or Alabama team, then, you know, I could see that starting to come into play. You know, I think at that point, given FSU's strength of schedule and the fact that they don't have Jordan Travis, that could hurt them. But if they win out, man, I mean, I don't know how you can hold it against this team if they still haven't lost, even with Tate Rodemaker playing quarterback.
Yeah, you look at there won't be 4 other undefeated teams. There will only be 4 technically because Ohio State, Michigan play each other this week. But the potential, like you said, if they did have a loss, and you're looking at a 1-loss Florida State team versus a potentially 1-loss Washington team if they were to lose to Oregon in the Pac-12 championship, or you know, a 1-loss Washington, 1-loss Oregon, 1-loss Texas, 1-loss Alabama if they were to beat Georgia. And this just goes to show that we need that 12-team playoff because there are so many worthy teams of being in this conversation. But I will say I think it would be a mistake for the committee to take out a Florida State. Let's not forget, in the first edition of the college football playoffs, if I remember correctly, was that not the year that Cardale Jones, the 3rd-string quarterback, led Ohio State to a national championship victory over Oregon? with a third string quarterback, I mean, if you would have taken them out based on their quarterback situation, we would never have saw that historic run with what the Buckeyes did that season.
Yeah, and there's a lot of people down in your neck of the woods that probably were upset about that at the time. The fact that they didn't make that decision based on Ohio State's quarterback injuries, and obviously we saw how that ended up playing out. So yeah, I mean, I think it's really hard to hold that against Florida State if they don't lose a game here. I mean, if Tate Rodemaker takes care of business as usual, I mean, it's not like they've been destroying everybody. I mean, Miami played him tough, Clemson played him tough. We'll see what happens with Florida and Louisville, but I'm saying they've had close games. So, I mean, I think if they continue to play like they have been, without Jordan Travis, I think that would be a massive overreach from the CFP committee to try to, say they shouldn't be in as a 13-0 team, just because their starting quarterback's hurt, even though, like I said, they've beaten, a rival on the road and likely a top 10 Louisville team in the ACC championship at that point.
Well, let's talk about rivalry games. Rivalry week it is, right? We're going to discuss what are the best rivalries. Unfortunately, once again, there's no Texas versus Texas A&M, which is one of my favorite rivalry games for a guy with no dog in the fight. But there are some very key rivalry games going on this weekend. And one of them is Oregon State, Oregon, formerly known as the Civil War. And if you look at what's at stake this week, I think it's huge when you look at Oregon versus Oregon State. Now, Oregon State, because they lost to Washington, don't have a shot to get into the the Pac-12 title game. But I like this for a couple of reasons. Bo Nix is still in the race to win the Heisman. We'll argue about our Heisman pick a little bit later on. But you look at this game, because if Oregon was to lose this game, Arizona wins their game, we're going to see a rematch of Washington-Arizona. Whereas if Oregon wins this game, Oregon will get to play Washington in the Pac-12 title game. Now, wouldn't it be just perfect scenario? The final game as Pac-12 members, maybe Pac-2 members in the future, for Oregon State to beat Oregon in this game and to knock them out of a Pac-12 title matchup that's featuring two teams that are potentially going to the Big Ten. Otherwise, it would be Washington going to the Big Ten versus Arizona, who's going to the Big 12.
Yeah, I mean, it's fitting. That the final game we're going to get in this rivalry series is one of the more consequential ones we've seen in a while. Real quick, Patrick, have they dropped Civil War? Are they not calling it that anymore?
I believe I thought I read somewhere that they weren't going to refer to it as a Civil War anymore, just because what the term Civil War is applying to. But let's be honest, that's the term that a lot of people are going to use for this game, regardless, because of what it's been called for so many years.
Yeah, no, I mean, I guess that's understandable, but it has gone the way of the world's largest outdoor cocktail party, it sounds like, so that's a bummer. But yeah, so, it's a really consequential game here because, like you said, Arizona still has a path to the Pac-12 championship against a Washington team that they gave a really good game a couple months ago. So interested to see, and Arizona's playing better now than they were then. Coming off a huge win over Utah, pretty impressive. And Oregon State has a big opportunity here. I mean, they won this game last year. You know what I mean? So I think Oregon State has taken a leap this year for sure. And I think Oregon has too. This team's playing so well right now. I think ever since the Washington game, which they had a really good shot to win, talked about it at the time, go 0 for 3 on fourth downs, where if you convert probably one of them, you're going to win that game. So, that game was about as much of a toss-up as you can get. They've looked as good as anyone in the country since then. So, I mean, really intriguing game we've got here. I thought Oregon State, acquitted themselves pretty well against Washington. That was in a driving rainstorm. So that certainly impacted a Washington team that really relies on, downfield passing. So I think that's something to kind of keep in mind. But yeah, I mean, it's really interesting, and like you said, we could really see as much as we've been thinking we were getting a Washington-Oregon rematch, things could get a little squirrely here, depending on what happens in this game. So, and it's the last one, yesterday, I believe it was yesterday that they announced that Washington and Washington State have agreed to continue the Apple Cup beyond this year, with Washington leaving for the Big Ten. No such agreement in this rivalry as of now. So this is the last one for the foreseeable future. Could be some fireworks.
Absolutely could be some fireworks on that one. That to me, this game, there's a lot on the table. Speaking of a lot on the table, there's another game going on this weekend, Tyler. That there's a lot on the line. Big Ten title berth, college football playoff spot. I mean, it could be like last year where both teams still get in. But what do you think about this matchup going on at the Big House?
Yeah, well, first of all, I don't think we're looking at a year where the loser of this game gets in. I just want to put that out there right now. We didn't necessarily think that was going to happen at the time last year. Ended up playing out that way. I think it would take a lot this season. There's a lot of teams in the mix, a lot more than there were this time last year. So I think the stakes here are really clear. I think winner is going to probably win the Big Ten and go to the playoff. Loser is going to, I guess, not the Rose Bowl, but another New Year's Six game. And I mean, I think both programs, for being so good, they have each a lot of anxiety coming into this game. I mean, Ohio State cannot afford to lose this game 3 years in a row. Ryan Day can't afford to lose this game 3 years in a row. As good as his record is, and I think he's as good a coach truly as anyone in the country, this side of Nick Saban and Kirby Smart. But I mean, that's a fan base that judges a season by what happens on one game Thanksgiving weekend, and can't lose it 3 years in a row, especially when you had, such a long streak going prior to that. You gotta find a way to reverse that this year. In Michigan, don't really need to go in too deep on that one. I think it's kind of self-evident, but no Jim Harbaugh, obviously massive chip on their shoulders, some manufactured adversity there. Just really intriguing game. I think Michigan looked the most vulnerable they have all season last week against a pretty bad Maryland team. That game was way more competitive than we expected. Ohio State, more tested, taking care of business recently. I think it's shaping up to be a really interesting game. And I felt pretty good about Michigan winning it a couple weeks ago. I'm less confident in that now, honestly. I think it's much more of a toss-up game than I thought it was, just earlier, this month or late October.
It's really interesting. If you go back to the preseason, back in July, Paul Feinbaum was discussing Ryan Day about being on the hot seat. And that's a little bit surprising considering the man has got 6 total losses in his career as the head coach at Ohio State. But 2 of those losses, as you mentioned, were against the biggest rivals, Michigan, the last 2 years. He loses 3 straight. That's going to be tough. But it also is interesting to me that somebody who had, at that time, if that is indeed the case after this week, that he loses and he's 54-7, and people are talking about hot seat. That's really interesting to me. I think Ohio State needs to win this game. But I think if there's a resume that could survive a one loss, especially if it's a close loss to Michigan, it would probably be Ohio State. But then again, the College Football Playoff Committee could make the argument that Michigan, if they were to lose, they go, well, they didn't have Jim Harbaugh. But I don't know if they want to open that can of worms. But this really is a huge matchup for both. And it could be the last matchup where we see Jim Harbaugh as the head football coach of Michigan. He's not going to coach in this game, but this could be the last season with Harbaugh, considering what is transpiring off the field for the Wolverines with recent firings that they've made and the recent allegations about the NCAA probe into the sign sealing scandal.
Yeah, and I'll just say this right now. Las Vegas Raiders job currently open. Los Angeles Chargers job not currently open, but they lost to Green Bay yesterday, and then Brandon Staley had kind of a I don't want to call it a meltdown, but didn't look like a head coach under control in the press conference after. So that's a situation to watch, established young quarterback. Point being, I think Harbaugh is going to look at NFL options this year, as he always has, as he has been the last 2 off seasons. It's only going to be more amplified this year with everything that's gone on. This is just a fact of life now. I think until he leaves or retires, you're going to have to deal with this every off season, and there's going to be some potential suitors this year. That's all I'm going to say.
It's interesting. I remember as we talk about the situation with Harbaugh, and I remember people saying, "Oh, well, the NFL is not going to look at him if he's under investigation." The NCAA. Tell that to Antonio Pierce, the interim head coach of the Las Vegas Raiders.
I was going to say, I was like, I don't think so.
Yeah, I'm not buying it either. There's plenty going to be left to talk about, but that's another one of those games that you've got to watch this weekend just to see the intrigue and what could potentially be the fallout of that game. But let's talk about who's going to punch their ticket to the postseason. We're talking about those teams that are sitting at 5-6 with an opportunity this weekend. Tyler, who are you looking at?
Yeah, I've got a team that doesn't have a head coach currently. Dino Babers fired at Syracuse on Sunday. I think saw it coming. They've had sort of the last 2 seasons have played out in pretty much identical fashion for them. They started out last year. They started out 6-0. This year they started out either 4-0 or 5-0. Point being, like, nice undefeated start, long losing streak. They're tired of it. It's been 8 years. He had like a 41-55 record, something along those lines. So Dino Babers out, but interim coach is their tight ends coach, Nunzio Campanile. He is got an opportunity to get bowl eligible this weekend. They're 5-6. They're playing Wake Forest, a 4-7 Wake Forest team. Really a rough year for Wake Forest. They got picked, I believe, to finish last in the ACC before the season, which kind of I was surprised by that because losing Sam Hartman is tough, but Dave Clawson is a really good coach, and he's had success there without Sam Hartman. So, Mitch Griffiths, the quarterback, was Hartman's backup, played when he was dealing with the blood clots last year. So kind of expected that would, be relatively turnkey. Hasn't really been. They've had a rough season. Syracuse has not played well against the better teams in the league, but they've still been fairly competitive in games kind of against the middle of the pack. I think this is a really good opportunity for them. And I think, getting to a bowl game would maybe give them a little bit of momentum going into this hire, because it's a hard job. Syracuse is a tough Power 5 job. Private school in Central New York, like in the ACC, which is a dying conference. Like, this is not an easy job. So I think any momentum you can get coming into a new hire would probably be good.
Both seasons, they ended up losing 6 of their final 7 games. Last year, one of those 6 games was against Wake Forest, a team that they haven't beat since 2019, the 39-30 finish in Syracuse. Not looking great, but we'll see if they get any kind of bump with Dino Babers now out in the ACC. That is going to be an extremely difficult job, whoever takes a hold of that, because they're kind of behind the game as far as facilities, as far as NIL. So that is a tough job. At Syracuse, and it's just interesting because they're just replacing their basketball coach after last season, Jim Boeheim, and now the football coach situation that's got to get fixed. Let's talk about another game. Go ahead, Tyler.
Oh, sorry. I was just saying, just real quick, one more note on Syracuse. Yeah, that's a good point too, because it's baked into the fact that it's a basketball school, and while Kentucky and Duke are also basketball schools, Kentucky's not a private school. Duke's in the South, where it's easier to recruit football players. So Syracuse is a basketball school without some of the football advantages that other basketball schools do have. So yeah, really tough job.
Yeah, you could bring up North Carolina. You could bring up Kansas. All these basketball powers or schools that are predominantly good in basketball. They have those opportunities, whereas Syracuse is looking at a little tougher slate. The game that I'm looking at is the team that lost to my Red Raiders last week, UCF. They're going to be at home, senior day. I'm kind of interested to see how John Rice Plumlee goes out. They're going up against Houston, whose Houston season's over. All that they can do at this point is play spoiler, but I have to like the job that RJ Harvey has done running the football for UCF. You look at that wide receiver combo, both wide receivers transferred in from Alabama and Auburn. We talk about Kobe Hudson and Javon Baker. They're going to be able to attack that Houston secondary who, if you go back and look at some of their games this year, they really can't slow anybody down. And I don't feel like their offense is good enough to keep up in a shootout. After fumbling their way last week against Texas Tech, I think UCF gets it done this week and punches their ticket to the postseason with a 6-6 record.
Yeah, are you with me? Am I off base in saying that I feel like UCF has far and away been the most ready to go of these newcomers? To me, it's not even really close.
Yeah,
would you agree with that?
Yeah, you look at, BYU has looked horrible this year at times,
yeah.
and their offense looks lost. They've got to figure some things out. Kalani Sitake needs he needs to clear some things up there. Houston looks horrible. UCF has looked pretty good. Cincinnati with Scott Satterfield. Look, I didn't think Satterfield should have had a job after last year with Cincinnati. Maybe take a year off, be a an assistant somewhere. He jumped right into it with Cincinnati, and they looked lost. And they were transfer heavy with some of their guys, with Emory Jones and Xavier Henderson, a couple of Florida guys that you're familiar with. But of the group, yeah, he does, and that's not surprising to me that UCF looks the most ready, because I think Gus Malzahn is a pretty good football coach, especially on the offensive side of the ball. Do I think he's the greatest head coach? Not really, but I do like the way that he dials it up offensively, and he's one of these coaches who can I think he gets more out of his players with less, if that makes any sense.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think that's basically the exact point. That's kind of the line I was heading in is, I mean, obviously Scott Satterfield, that I don't want to like pile on too much, but that was a baffling hire. I made no sense at the time, makes even less sense now that we're almost a year into it. Just we'll see how that one goes. But I mean, Gus Malzahn, like only one of this group that has, a track record of Power 5 success. I think he's the best coach of these newcomers. And he's got them, they're competitive this year. I mean, they absolutely pummeled Oklahoma State in a game that really just made no sense. They should have beaten Baylor, had a really bad blown lead in that game. And then, they almost beat Oklahoma too. So I think that, they've really looked like they're close. And I think this is a good opportunity to end the year, get bowl eligible against, like you said, a struggling Houston team that, as we'll mention in a little bit later in the show, maybe going to be the last week of the current era here. We'll see how that one plays out. But yeah, I mean, I think making a bowl would be great progress for UCF, being the only newcomer to get to a bowl game. That'd be huge for this program. I think they've been waiting for this moment for a long time, and I think they've got a good architect leading them there into the Big 12, in the new era of the Big 12, in Gus Malzahn. So I'm excited to see what this team is able to do, when some of these powerhouses clear out of the conference next year.
Yeah, it's going to be interesting because the new Big 12 next year is going to have Cam Rising returning. For a seventh year. Another quarterback who could play for a seventh year, obviously he's not going to be at Texas Tech, is Tyler Shugg, who announced on Sunday that he was going to be entering the transfer portal as a graduate transfer. He'll be playing on his third team because he wants to play in the NFL. He's going to need a full season, so we'll see if he can stay healthy, play a seventh year. Who knows where he might land. But as I always do, I like to stick in the Big 12. It's my bread and butter. It's the thing that I know the most. So let's talk about must-see games, and I'm going to be talking about my Red Raiders against Texas this week, Friday night in Austin. Final time that for a while that these two teams will likely play. Let's be honest, Texas has owned this matchup for most of the time. But when these two teams have met on Thanksgiving or right after Thanksgiving, they play some close games at times. Tech has won a few in Austin. But that's not why this game's interesting to me. I mean, if Texas wins this game, they clinch their spot, the number one spot in the Big 12 championship. They'll be the home team. And then they have to await all of Saturday's action to see who they'll be playing. But for me, it's Brett Yormark who's going to be in Austin. And I know this has got Texas fans in a tizzy. And let me tell you why, because back in August when Brett Yormark was in Lubbock, and he was talking to the fans in Lubbock, and he played to their emotions when he said, Coach McGuire, I'm not going to put any pressure on you, but I'm going to be in Austin for Thanksgiving, okay? And you better take care of business like you did right here in Lubbock last year. Now, he later explained that he was playing to the crowd, having fun, but I don't think Texas fans are going to buy that one bit. They want to win this game. They want to win it big just because they want to throw some egg on the face of Brett Yormark.
Yeah, which, I mean, look, I understand, like, you don't really want to have, like, some semblance of bias from the league office or whatever, but, like, I'm sorry, man, you can't have your cake and eat it too. Like, I'm sick of it. Like, these new, it's the same thing. You're seeing it in, like, the Pac-12 too. The teams that are leaving the Pac-12, like, look at all the whole legal thing that's played out between Oregon State and Washington State and the rest of the departing Pac-12. Like, these teams want to, leave the conference like in a lurch, leave in the middle of the night, without any warning. And then all of a sudden they want to be like catered to. Like, I'm sorry, like, it's good. Of course it's going to make the league mad when you blow up an existing established league. So I think people need to calm down about that. And Brett Yormark's not going to have any direct impact on this game, but it's a good one. It's an exciting one. I think it's a bummer this rivalry's ending. It kind of has some sentimental value to me a little bit because, back when the 2008 season was kind of the first year where, I'd followed Florida before that, but that was kind of the first year where I was like really locked into college football, like as a whole. And I remember one of the first like wow, this sport is incredible games was that, that Michael Crabtree game back in 2008. I remember coming back from a Florida Georgia game, watching that, the end of that game, and it was just incredible. So a lot of great, moments in this rivalry. It's a lot of fun. I think it's a bummer that it's, kind of one of the casualties of the new era of this sport, but, really interesting game, a Texas team that's played, not really able to, pull away from teams significantly. I mean, a 3-point win over TCU 2 weeks ago, sort of played with their food a little bit against Iowa State, a decent Iowa State team on the road. So yeah, I mean, a lot of intrigue here, and Texas Tech has the opportunity to kind of, fire one last shot across the bow and ruin Texas's season.
Yeah, and very much like the 2008 season, while Tech was undefeated at the time too, they had something to play for. They were playing for a Big 12 title berth, which never came because of that three-way tie with Oklahoma. But again, have the same type of opportunity where that loss cost Texas a shot at the title. A loss here absolutely ruins any opportunity, whereas a win still leaves them in the running. But, and I'm not surprised by Brett Yormark's comments back in August and truth, mostly because, Brett's kind of the hip commissioner. Fans love him. I mean, he worked in the NBA. He worked, with, the Brooklyn Nets and that group. So not real surprised that Brett is the kind of guy that does not have a problem pushing the envelope, so to speak. But let's talk about your game, that your must-see game on Rivalry Week.
Yeah, so it's not like the most exciting matchup of the weekend, but it is one that I think has some really interesting sort of storylines to it. So I'm looking at Clemson, South Carolina. Last year, South Carolina ends not only Clemson's winning streak in the rivalry series, it had been like 7 years, something like that, but also they end like a 30-something game home winning streak for Clemson. We've since seen them drop. They've dropped the FSU game at home 2 this year. So, revenge game here for Clemson now going on the road to Columbia against a South Carolina team that's had a pretty disappointing year. Team that people thought might be an SEC East dark horse, after the way they closed things out last year, hasn't played out like that at all. Have lost some tough games. They're 5-6. Opportunity to get to a bowl game here. Feels like something that Shane Beamer really needs to do in year 3. But to do it, he's going to have to beat a Clemson team that sort of been playing better recently. I think the defense is really good. We saw them do a good job of containing Drake May in North Carolina this past weekend. They've done that. I think Klubnik's playing better. They're establishing the run, and their defense is very solid. So it's a tough team to beat, And I don't think South Carolina is as explosive as we saw last week. So, I think, to me, just both teams have a lot of anxiety here because, if you're Clemson, Dabo is sort of righted the ship here a little bit. I think if you end this year, you could win this game, go 8-4, win a bowl game, go 9-4. I think people are feeling pretty good about that. Maybe Dabo makes some more changes this offseason, but he sort of salvaged what looked like it could be heading towards a really bad season. That all goes out the window, though, if you lose to your biggest rival for the second year in a row. And if you're South Carolina, I don't think anyone thought 5-7 was a possibility this year. You lose this game to an unranked Clemson team at home. You've lost games at home to a Florida team that you had a 10-point lead on with like less than 2 minutes to play. They've really squandered some opportunities here. I think this is one that neither team can really afford to lose. So it makes it interesting.
Yeah, and I want to see, is this going to be the last game for Rattler? Or is there a bowl game coming? I want to see that. But again, you look at a Clemson team, they need something to build on. And I think it starts with this, winning this football game, potentially winning their bowl game, go to the offseason, build some momentum. Dabo finally looking himself in the mirror and saying, okay, I've got to address some of these transfers. I got to bring some guys in to help boost up his roster. But I think, it is an interesting game. It may not have a ton of intrigue when it comes to some of the better rivalry games, so to speak. It does have a lot of intrigue with a bowl game on the line or egg on the face, like I've said before, with Dabo Swinney. So that'll be interesting. Aubrey, let's talk about the Heisman Trophy, since everybody wants to talk about the Heisman and who should be ranked number 1. I know when we look at this, Michael Penix Jr. was kind of the front runner to begin the season. It kind of feels like he's died down, and 2 other guys have kind of stepped up. So go ahead, Tyler, make your case for your candidate to win the Heisman Trophy this year.
So the Heisman is meant to be for the most outstanding player in the country. Not, the most outstanding player that's on the best, not the best quarterback on a team with one loss or less. And if you're looking at who the most outstanding player in the country this season is at this exact moment, there's 2 weeks left in the season, but at this exact moment, the most outstanding player in the country is far and away is Jaden Daniels. I mean, I don't know if I've ever seen a player like him. I mean, the way he throws the ball and his speed, I mean, he runs like Tyreek Hill. I mean, I don't understand it. He hits like 4.2. He runs like a 4.2 40. Like, it's crazy. Like, I don't understand how you can be that fast as a quarterback that's 6'4". He is absolutely unreal. The production is all there. I mean, we have a nice piece up on LSU Wire right now that was published yesterday by one of our writers, Will Rosenblatt. Did a really nice job comparing the stats between Jaden Daniels and the guy that you're going to talk about in Bo Nix, and when you look at the comparison between the stats, again, at this exact moment in time, because there's 2 weeks left in the year and Bo Nix is probably going to get an extra game. So keep that in mind. But at this exact moment in time, it's no comparison. Jaden Daniels has the best numbers in the country of anyone. And Bo Nix having a great season. Like, there's no, it would be a valid choice to vote for Bo Nix to win the Heisman, but if things continue at the rate they're on right now and Jaden Daniels doesn't win it, I honestly think it'd be like a travesty, and I think it would kind of subvert the legitimacy of the award, which has kind of happened already a bit in recent years. But I think if he doesn't win it this year and he produces the way he did last week against Georgia State against Texas A&M, look, LSU is clearly trying to get him the Heisman. Like, Brian Kelly left him in the game in a blowout well into the fourth quarter. He had 8 total touchdowns, tied Joe Burrow's SEC record for single game touchdowns, 6 passing, 2 rushing. It's just absolutely unreal, the production. He's at 46 touchdowns on the season total. It's crazy.
Yeah, you can look at some of those numbers. Those are crazy. One thing I thought was crazy, over the last 3 games, Jaden Daniels has 16 touchdowns to 1 interception, if you factor in his rushing touchdowns. Do you know what Bo Nix numbers are in the last 3 games? 16 touchdowns to 1 interception. The exact same number, which I think is very interesting. Yeah, he's got 35 touchdowns, only 2 interceptions this year. Let's also not forget the fact that he's probably about to set an NCAA record for the highest completion percentage, breaking the record that Mac Jones set during his national championship run at 78.1. That's where he sits right now. You also can factor in his rushing touchdowns. They're not as high as they were last year. He had 15 last year, only 5 this year. But still, the fact that he's got 40 touchdowns, 2 interceptions, and I know, like you said, Jaden Daniels, 46 and 2. I honestly, I'll make my case for Bo based on what's going on. Again, he's leading Oregon to potentially a national championship berth, getting into the college football playoff. It's all going to depend on what happens this weekend against Oregon State. And it's also going to happen what happens in the Pac-12 title game. Should they win against Washington, get their revenge, get to 12-1. Going to be hard to leave them out of the conversation, especially after somebody loses this weekend. So I totally understand that. But again, now we're talking about a quarterback on a contending team, the one thing that you don't want. But here's my thing on Jaden Daniels. I don't have a problem with a quarterback who's playing on a 3-loss team, who's putting up those kind of numbers being the Heisman winner, because we've seen it before. Was RG3 on a team that was contending for a national championship the year that he won it? I don't think so. I believe they had 3 losses. I'm not 100% sure. I'd have to go back and look. Johnny Manziel, who everybody talked about the most electric player in college football that year. Your guy, Tim Tebow, won it on a 3-loss team. So it's not like this is uncharted territory. We've seen this before. And that is why, while my argument is for Bo Nix, I can totally understand Jaden Daniels, because let's be honest, he is putting out some ridiculous numbers. And a lot of that, like you said, is because Brian Kelly refused to take him out. And I don't blame him. Let him beef up that resume, considering he's going to have to play one. He's probably going to play one less game than Bo Nix and Michael Penix Jr. Yeah,
and Brian Kelly literally said after the game, I mean, he didn't say specifically we're leaving him in to try to get him the Heisman, but he said, I feel obligated that it's my responsibility to advocate for the guy, push him, put him out there as much as possible. Like he said, his philosophy, coaching philosophy in that regard, and lobbying for awards has changed with Jaden Daniels. So, I mean, like you said, guys have won the Heisman on 3-loss teams before. That's far from unprecedented. And I mean, LSU's defense is horrific. Like to even be in position to be 9-3, Jaden Daniels has to put up 50 points a game, and he's done that. And they've still almost, they still have not been able to win some games. I mean, they would have put up 40 on that Alabama defense if he hadn't, gotten the concussion. And without Jaden Daniels, this LSU team is truly 5-6 losses. I mean, even with the weapons they have offensively outside of him, he is such a dynamic player. You can't just plug and play with someone else there, and the defense is so bad. So, I mean, to me, like if you're talking about who is the most valuable player to their team in the entire country, there's not even a comparison. I don't think there's anyone else who brings more, wins above replacement or whatever metric you want to use to their team than Jaden Daniels does.
Yeah, no, I can totally see where you're coming from on that one. I think it's you're spot on there. If you take him off of that team, how are they? How good are they? So I'm completely with you on that. But again, it'll be interesting to kind of see how that all plays out. But let's talk about some coaches who might potentially be on the hot seat after this season, going into the off season. But before we get into our guys, I want to share you a quote. I saw this from On3. Basically, it was Paul Feinbaum on Lincoln Riley. I don't know if I've seen a worse coaching job by anyone than Lincoln Riley this year. It's a complete disaster. And quite frankly, he ought to pack it up. I don't really see his path moving forward. Blamed everything on Alex Grinch. They haven't been any better. They've been worse. Well, maybe Lincoln, you ought to look in the mirror. Maybe you're just a total fraud as a coach. Maybe you just lived off a couple of Heisman winners. What Oklahoma did for you, all the people in Oklahoma who were heartbroken 2 years ago never thought that they'd get over their blow-off. They're over it now. Lincoln Riley is nowhere near the coach that we collectively tried to make him to be. You ever seen a college season ruined more than Lincoln Riley did for Caleb Williams? I said this a year ago, and I thought it was really a shame that Bryce Young had such a terrible final year. He lost 2 games. I mean, you have a generational quarterback, and he finished 7-5. So real quick before we really dive into that, have you ever seen a college season ruined more than what Lincoln Riley did for Caleb Williams? I'd probably point to Patrick Mahomes. I'm a little biased there. But Patrick Mahomes put up ridiculous numbers before going to the NFL, but he never really had a chance to show it off on the national level because his defense was so horrific, which is very reminiscent of what we saw with USC this year. And I know you're not exactly a guy who buys in to Lincoln Riley, but I just thought it was interesting that Paul Feinbaum went on this whole maybe you should just quit. I don't know that I'm there. But this is his first year of adversity, and I feel like everybody's just like gone off the rails when it comes to Lincoln Riley.
Yeah, I love when Feinbaum goes nuclear. He doesn't do it very often, but sometimes just out of nowhere he will, and he did that here. I think his Lincoln Riley take is a bit advanced. I honestly, though, am starting to trend in that direction a little bit. I think – I don't know, man. This was a really rough year. I don't think anyone thought – I mean, we talked about USC before the season. We both were like, I'm not sure if we buy this as a playoff team. I think there are some flaws. I don't think the defense has improved enough. I don't want to put words in your mouth, but when I was saying that, I meant like they're going to go 10-2 or something like that. Like there's going to be like last year. I didn't mean they go 7-5 and lose every tough game on the slate and almost lose to like Colorado and stuff. Like, I mean, this has been a disaster of a season and a real waste of a I don't know if I want to say generational player, like that might be a bit excessive, but a very, very talented and fun college football. I mean, and I don't want to say like, I mean, he's NFL prospect too, but a guy that, at the college level was just as fun a player as you'll see, really missed an opportunity here. And I think, the bigger problem with Lincoln is that a lot of the issues he has, are reminiscent to issues he had at Oklahoma. I think Oklahoma fans have been a little vindicated in that. I think that, say what you will about Brent Venables. I think this team has missed the mark at times this year, but he's building, I think, a program that's more identity-wise poised to compete nationally than what Lincoln Riley's doing. And going to the Big Ten, man, I don't know. Maybe he goes and hires Zach Arnett or, gets some other really good defensive mind to run that thing and they get things fixed. But the recruiting's not there right now, especially on the defensive side of the ball. And, we'll see what happens with Malachi Nelson. You and I talked about this off air, but 5 stars, as much as you want to have a 5-star recruit at quarterback, it doesn't always work out the way it did with Caleb Williams. So I have a lot of questions about the way this is going with Lincoln. I don't think anyone thought that they would lose as much momentum just across the board as they did this season.
To answer your question, no. I think I was thinking 9-3 might have been a real possibility for
Yeah.
for USC. I don't know that I thought that they would go the route of 7-5. That itself is interesting, and I was just looking it up on the USA Today coaches salary database. But I guess because USC is private, we have no information on that. But I assume he's got a really ridiculously high buyout, so I don't think he's going anywhere. But again, I wouldn't be surprised if, with some of the conversation around Lincoln, that he might look to the NFL in the future. But at this point in time, I don't know. I just feel like one bad season in this guy's tenure, and everybody's acting like he's Dave Aranda, which, by the way, is the coach that I wanted to talk about. Dave Aranda, another coach who coaches at a private school, but this is interesting to me. I feel like he should be on the hot seat, and I kind of question if he's going to survive this offseason. If you look at what happened when he took over the program in 2020 after Matt Rule went to the NFL, he finished 2-7. Not surprising considering, but he turned it completely around. He actually pulled a Matt Rule the very next season, going from pretty much worst to first. He went from ninth in the Big 12 to first, won the Sugar Bowl, finished fifth in the AP poll, sixth in the coaches poll, 12-2 record. He's won 9 games since in 2 years. He's 9-15. And I don't know if you've watched any Baylor football this year, but anytime that they play a team that's decent on offense, not great, decent on offense, they get absolutely boat raced. And you can look at their games, some of the games that they've had this year. They're bad, really bad. And so it makes me wonder, is Dave Aranda a guy who is just a good coordinator and not a very good head coach? Or is he in a situation that is hard to win because of all the talented college football programs in Texas? And we're seeing guys like, Joey McGuire bring a 5-star wide receiver to Lubbock. We're seeing, Texas A&M, who constantly is up there. Texas is constantly up there. TCU can recruit pretty well. It feels like everybody around them is getting better, except for Baylor and maybe Houston. But maybe he's a better coordinator. I don't know. But the situation as it's brewing in Waco doesn't look good.
Yeah, I mean, I think my Aranda take most of the season has been, look, big buyout. It's year 4, year 3, year 4.
Mm-hmm.
Like, this guy's gonna probably stick around. Now though, like I don't know, man. Like they're really bad. They're so bad. I don't really understand how they're this bad. I mean, they start things off losing to Texas State, which a better Texas State team than we thought they were at the time, but not like the best team, not like a top 5 G5 team, still a team that has flaws. No real excuse for how much of a beatdown they put on Baylor in that opener. And since then, things have only gotten worse. 2 weeks ago, they got absolutely pummeled by Kansas State, which, like, yeah, Kansas State does that to people, but, like, man, 59-25, I think is what that was. Like, come on, man. You can't do that. And I think, mentioning Joey McGuire is a really interesting point, because Joey McGuire, a guy that was on this staff, and it seems like losing him is hurt. He was kind of the I guess, Texas liaison on a staff of guys that, especially with Dave Aranda, no real Texas ties. He's not a Texas guy. He's coached all around the country, but not really a Texas lifer by any stretch of the imagination. And I think they're missing him. I think they're missing McGuire. I mean, they've already said, like, there's going to be offensive staff changes here if Dave Aranda doesn't get the axe. I mean, their AD went out on the record a couple months ago and said we're going to make staff changes after the season. So you can expect that. And Aranda's probably going to stick around and be allowed to make those staff changes. But man, with every passing week, I become a little less confident in that fact, because this is just a really bad team.
You had to go to overtime to beat a bad Houston team. You almost lost to a really bad Cincinnati team in the blowouts. And guess what? This week against West Virginia is probably not going to get any better, because I don't know that they can stop Garrett Green, who just absolutely went off last week, that quarterback. So for me, when I look at this team and how they're performing, Dave Aranda might not be the answer, but I don't know if they have the money to do anything about it this offseason. It might be one of those they've just got to sit on it and wait till the next cycle, which I don't know that it's going to get any easier to replace him then either.
Yeah, I mean, at least you're not competing with Texas A&M though. I mean, I don't think there's going to be a massive Texas opening next year. Which, I mean, I think for any job. I mean, I think we talked about this too for Arkansas. I think that impacted Arkansas's decision making too. I think I mean, I could be wrong about that, but I think it's less likely Sam Pittman sticks around if the A&M job doesn't open up, because I think, guys like Jeff Traylor, who we know, this week it got reported interviewed for the Texas A&M job. So obviously a candidate there, I think would have been a candidate at the Arkansas job, would be a candidate at this Baylor job if it were to open. But it's going to be hard to convince anyone to come to your job if Texas A&M also wants them.
Yeah, Jeff Traylor, former associate head coach at Arkansas before he took over the program at UTSA, and he's done a fantastic job there, and really has another opportunity to win a conference championship, depending on how they play against Tulane, and have an opportunity to play SMU, most likely in that title game. Now, Tyler, for you, as we wrap things up, you're also sticking in the Lone Star State as far as your coach that's probably going to be feeling the most heat this weekend.
Yeah, it's Dana. Like, I just think we're at a point where, like, I don't really know. I mean, I don't want to exhaust this argument, because I think we've talked about it a lot all season on this show. They're not where they need to be. I mean, I think they, every time you think they're turning a corner, like, got a lead on Oklahoma State. Okay, what are they doing here? They don't pull it out, and they end up losing by 13 at home. Like, I don't see it with this team. I think that, like all these newcomers have struggled, but I think I'd say UCF has shown signs that this team can compete at this level. I'd say even BYU has looked a little bit, feisty. I mean, they gave Oklahoma a run for their money on Saturday. So, yep. I mean, I think that I just look at where this Houston team is at. I feel like it should be, even taking UCF into account, I feel like this should be the of these newcomers, the job that's best poised to succeed in the new era. And honestly, the only program right now that I think looks like it's in a worse spot is Cincinnati. So yeah, I mean, I think Dana couldn't afford a losing season here. I think, people understood that it was going to be a tough challenge coming into the Big 12, but I don't think they've met that challenge at all. And I think there's just so many good candidates in the state of Texas, even with, we talked about the A&M thing opening. I think the level of desperation in Houston is a little bit more than the level of desperation in Waco. And also, I think Houston is a potentially better job now that it's in the Power 5 than Baylor is, and certainly doesn't have some of the limitations of being a private school.
Well, let's talk about, Houston and Dana. He's as close to a 500 coach at Houston, 3 seasons of 4 or less wins since he took over in 2019. One of those was the COVID year where they went 3-5. Take that how you will. Then he went 12-2, and then 8-5 and 4-7. So 31-27 overall, 20-18 in conference play. My big concern this year was the loss to Rice to kick it off. How they looked against a TCU team who has looked very pedestrian early in the year. You talk about the loss to Texas. They put up some fight, but Texas seems to let people back in. We've seen that all year long. Yeah, the game against Kansas State. The Cincinnati game. The Oklahoma State game. Now, the Oklahoma State game, Oklahoma State was coming off a 45-3 loss to UCF, but also Oklahoma State was behind in this game, and Houston lets them claw all back in it. It essentially just hands them another loss, which eliminates them from postseason play. And then obviously this week against UCF, I feel like it's probably going to be another one of those opportunities that they're just, they have an opportunity to play spoiler. I don't think they will. It's just been tough all the way around, and I, much like things got bad at West Virginia and reason why he left town, I feel like it's about to get bad in Houston as well.
Yeah, and look, I think it's important to recognize that Houston's a program that's been operating like a Power 5 team for a while, not just this season. And when they poached Dana away from West Virginia to bring him back to his home state, they gave him a contract that was, like a low-level Power 5 head coaching kind of contract. Like, it was a competitive contract. The results when they were in the American weren't even really in line with that. He wasn't even, I don't think, meeting like the Tom Herman standards, from his Houston days. I think, or the Kevin Sumlin's hands, like they weren't living up to that other than that one season where they went 12-2. And now they're in the Big 12. I mean, it just doesn't even seem like they're close. So like, I don't know what you can point to if you're Dana. Like, I don't know what proof of concept you have. Like, am I supposed to look at a 12-2 season when you were in the American 2 years ago and be like, okay, you've got this figured out, in the new era of the Big 12 with, an Arizona team that, we'll see if Jed Fish gets poached, but if he's still there, I think a program that is going in the right direction, a Utah program that's about as, consistent as we see. Arizona State's on the come up, Colorado, we'll see what's happening there. But point being, like, I mean, this team could so easily be way near the bottom of that mix for a while. And I think this is a crucial offseason to kind of reverse that course and get this team back on track towards actually being a relevant group of Power 5 program.
Yeah, it's not good. It doesn't look good, and we'll see. As the carousel continues to spin, plenty of openings that we're seeing at the Power 5 level, at the G5 level, and with the end of the season coming up this weekend, regular season finale, I think we're going to see a lot more coaches being let go, and we'll see as these schools look to scramble as we get closer to that early signing period coming up just before Christmas. They're going to have to hit the trails really hard, especially at Baylor and Houston if they want to keep their jobs as the head coach there. But that's going to do it for this edition of the College 12 Pack as we got you ready for Rivalry Week. I hope you enjoy the games this weekend. And for Tyler and myself, I want to wish y'all a happy Thanksgiving. Enjoy the time with your family. Enjoy the football all weekend long. It's going to be a lot of fun. We'll be back next week as we get you ready for Championship Saturday, Selection Sunday. There's going to be a lot to talk about next week. We'll see.